All of their ideas and opinions are those of their own. We as a group at Truth Force are not responsible for anything that's said or done here today.
Hey everybody from Oklahoma, I'm from your sister state of Texas. Woohoo! I wore my boots and everything. And I want to welcome the folks from my old sister state. I'm a native Iowan, so hey Nebraska. I don't know what other states are here, but God love you for all supporting this fight. Arkansas, all right. Any other state? Do we have Kansas or anybody? No. Nebraska, yeah, I love bold Nebraska. Okay, well my name is Rita Beving. I work with Public Citizen in Texas. I've been working on the tar sands effort for a couple years. It is a big challenge because we're a big state. As most of you know, it takes 10 hours to drive from one end to the other. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Keystone, which most of you in this audience already know about, and I'm going to introduce you to a new one that's coming through Oklahoma and Texas. So with that, we all know that tar sands is a threat to America's land and water. Next. Some of you guys already know the basics about tar sand, so I'm going to fly through this. As you know, tar sand or bitumens found in Alberta, in a place about the size of Florida. Next line. As you also know, they're slashing and burning the ancient boreal forest, as shown in this next slide. It takes 2 to 5 barrels of water for every barrel of tar sands crude that's produced. It releases at least 2 to 3 times more greenhouse gas emissions than a conventional crude product production. And it's been compared to millions of cars or 7 power plants. I mean, it's an outrageous amount of CO2. To the point that, next slide, that most of you have heard the top climate scientist of James Hansen say, exploitation of tar sands would make it implausible to stabilize our climate, and if tar sands are thrown into our fossil fuels mix, it's game over for the planet. Next slide. As most of you know, tar sands is mined. It looks like asphalt when it comes out of the ground. It is a solid, it looks like oily sand, and then it's liquefied with diluents for transport. Next slide. Those diluents include natural gas, benzene, hydrogen sulfide, and other toxic chemicals, xylene, toluene, pentanes, hexanes, you name it. Dilbit's highly pressurized once it's diluted because it's about as thick as peanut butter. Then it's pushed through a pipeline at pressures up to 1,440 psi, which some of you who live in an oil state know. Generally, crude's not pushed through higher than 600 or 700 psi. And because of the friction, next slide, David, it can get up to 158 degrees in that pipeline. Now, a common thing that many of us hear from TransCanada, or Enbridge for that matter, is they like to say, oh, it's really at 74 to 80 degrees when in the pipeline. Well, it might be when you first put it in there, but because of friction, because of this abrasive nature of this material, it'll heat up to 158. So tar sands, part of the reason why we're all so more concerned about tar sands than conventional oil is it's up to 10 times more acidic, sulfuric rather, 20 times more acidic, and 70 times more viscous than conventional crude. And all these factors contribute to pipeline deterioration and will brittle a pipeline faster over time. Next slide. Here's just a map of some of the pipelines that are proposed. Some of them may not be currently in the mix, but these are just some of the pipeline proposals from Canada down to the Texas coast. Next. 2 Canadian companies are actually racing to the Texas coast. All of you have heard about Keystone, but have you heard about Seaway? Seaway is also coming from Cushing down to the Texas coast. Now, as we know, in Texas, because that's where I'm based mostly, Keystone comes in about where Paris, Texas is, about 2 hours east of Dallas, where I live, north to south. Well, Seaway is practically in Dallas's backyard and is also racing to the coast to Cushing in an old repurposed pipeline that's 30 years old. And it'll actually carry more than the Keystone XL when it's twinned. They want to build an additional line parallel to that that will carry 850,000 barrels per day. Next. So this is the map I found of Keystone coming through Oklahoma. It's the only one I found. I can't really speak to Oklahoma since I don't work up here, but I know a lot of you have already been mobilizing. I know Rosemary Crawford and some of the other folks that have tried to tee this up, even when Obama made that unfortunate announcement, Cushing, the other summer. Next slide.
Yeah, I just got a call from
Okay.
Southwest.
I wish Michelle Barland-Smith was here from Michigan. I have had the opportunity to meet her personally. But what Michelle will tell you is, when the largest onshore spill in U.S. history happened on the Kalamazoo River near Marshall and Battle Creek, Michigan, they had people evacuated almost 6 miles away from the pipeline, because this is what happens. The benzene and the hydrogen sulfide, when there's a spill, goes airborne. The rest of the heavier material, the heavier bitumen, sinks like a stone. It's like paving a creek. So it traveled 35 miles. It's been more than 2 years and $850 million. And this spill is not cleaned up. And it started in July 2010. Just the other week, the EPA finally ordered Enbridge to dredge the Kalamazoo because they can't get all the oil up. That's how bad it is. And I'll tell you, when this spill happened, benzene was off the charts. It was at 15,000 parts per million. The ATSDR rate, the registry they use to quantify hazards to the public, the limit on benzene is 9. We thought it was a mistake. When we called up to Michigan, we said, oh, it couldn't be as high as 15,000. And they said, yeah, it was. So that's the dangers we're looking at should there be a spill. And as we know, Keystone's brand new pipeline, Keystone 1, has had more than 12 spills in less than a year's time. Also, we also know that Enbridge has now had this largest onshore spill in U.S. history. This stuff is so unstable that it can be ignited with a heat or spark. And as a matter of fact, Enbridge had 2 employees killed on the same Lakehead B line in 2007 by simply a defective tool making it explode. Next slide. So, I want to tell you a little bit about this other pipeline you may not have heard about. Enbridge has reversed an old pipeline that they bought out the partnership on with ConocoPhillips. It's called Seaway. And I look for repurposed pipelines to be the wave of the future. The reason being is, why should you go through what TransCanada is doing with a presidential permit, an environmental impact statement, all these hearings, et cetera, when all you got to do is buy out an old pipeline already in the ground and twin it to make a super highway. And that's exactly what Enbridge is proposing to do with Seaway. If you can see the map on the screen, you will see word Flanagan. They are going to twin the existing Spearhead line from the Midwest with the Flanagan line. Then, when they get to Cushing, they're going to twin the old Seaway line that's going to carry 400,000 barrels per day with a second line that's going to be 450,000 barrels per day. So you're going to have for 850,000 barrels per day of crude. Now, next slide. So this is really scary because down in Texas, and I'm sure you guys run into this in Nebraska and Oklahoma, we give our blessing for oil and gas out of the Railroad Commission. Bad name, but that's who blesses it. All you have to do in Texas is walk in the office. Any of us here could be a pipeline company. If we just check a box on a T4 form, say we're a common carrier, sign our name, and under penalty of perjury, you and I can start condemning landowners. Is that not ridiculous? And so that's what happens in Texas. And we're now in the legislature trying to change that. We've got some eminent domain and common carrier bills teed up because of all the bullying that the TransCanadas and the Enbridges of this world are doing to our folks, to our ranchers and farmers, and they should not be treated the way we all know they have been. Next. Okay, between 1999 and 2010, Enbridge, who wants the Seaway line, had 804 spills releasing more than 160,000 barrels or 6.8 million gallons of crude. That's half the oil spilled from the Exxon Valdez. It's more than the BP Deep Horizon spill that we've all come to know. But yet 16-year-olds were having seizures just like the BP spill up in Michigan. Next slide. So anyway, I told you a little bit about Enbridge. The Lakehead B line spill in Michigan was in a 43-year-old line. The Seaway is 36 years old, and now they want to twin it. To make matters worse with these kind of tar sand spills, what happens is the natural gas that they have to mix in the diluent wants to go airborne. So in a pipeline, it will go from liquid to vapor and create column separation or an air bubble. So that people will actually think, do I have a rupture on these computerized systems they have, or do I have an air bubble? And the way to remedy that is to simply push more oil through. So in case of the Kalamazoo, their workers actually push more oil through for 3 shifts and 17 hours. 17 hours they pushed oil through till some utility worker called up Enbridge and said by the river, you got a problem here, guys. We got oil, like tons of it, going in the river. Only then did they decide they had a rupture. Only then did they tell emergency responders. On top of it, Enbridge gave the incorrect MSDS sheets. Those are the emergency type sheets you give for hazardous materials. They gave them conventional crude MSDS sheets. I have a copy of them. When you get to the part where it says toxicity, it says not available. And you know why? Because they declare it as proprietary, just like they have done with fracking fluid. And so these emergency responders in the first week did not know what they were dealing with, essentially. Next. So now, what are we all supposed to do in Nebraska if this happens, or Oklahoma, or Texas? As we all know, these are rural areas. We've got volunteer fire departments. They can't deal with a hazardous spill like that. I work with some small towns in East Texas, Gallatin, Alto, and Reclaw. They would have to get a hazmat team at least an hour and a half in Tyler, Texas, or Longview to help them. And then we've got a problem with water contamination. You know, the president overlooked in Texas that there were 3 aquifers crossed by Keystone. The Carrizo-Wilcox, which feeds 60 counties and up to 12 million people. The Yewa Aquifer that feeds folks down by Diboll, Texas. And last, the Gulf Coast Aquifer. And as we all know, we have waterways threaten all the up and down this pipeline. In Texas alone, Keystone crosses 531 water crossings, but the Army Corps of Engineers just gave them a rubber stamp.
3 districts didn't even give it a second look and gave them a blanket 404 permits. So we all have to think about who's going to bear the liability and who's going to clean up such a spill. And here's another kicker to this whole deal. Guess what? Tar sand companies don't have to pay into the U.S. Spill Liability Fund because the IRS claims they're not crude. Yet, they come to Texas and they check the crude box that that's what they're carrying. So while conventional oil companies have to pay 8 cents a barrel into a conventional crude fund, these tar sand companies don't have to pay any money into the U.S. Spill Liability Fund. We had testimony at the Railroad Commission this past December, and that fund last year in February, just 2 months into the year, was at $131 million. That's all that was left out of $1 billion fund. Now, if we start increasing tar sands pipelines that are surely going to leak, just like Mike talked about, what are we going to do and who's going to pick up the tab? Probably us. Next slide. So in Texas, as Mike will tell you from neighbors, I've seen wetlands destroyed and filled in. This is actually Eleanor Fairchild's land near Winsboro. Just a few miles from her, I know a landowner who's got a gag order who can't speak anymore about tar sands, but his springs have been flowing for more than 2 months white with drilling fluid because of the drilling underneath the farmer's market road not a quarter mile from his house. Farm ponds on the other side of Eleanor's house have been contaminated with diesel fuel due to the sloppy operations in trenching this pipeline. Vineyards such as Mr. Holland's, also near Winsboro, a muscadine vineyard, just totally wiped out. There went his income. So those are the things that landowners have contended with, besides the bullying, less than ethical tactics of the landmen that have come and trespassed, many of them, on their properties. So I'm going to wrap this up, but what can we do? As the folks in Nebraska will tell you, they are going through a supplemental environmental impact statement. Their deadline is April 22nd. If we can write comments for how we feel, even though we don't live in Nebraska, we need to. We need to speak to what we know and what we fear can happen. And the other thing is, I hope the folks in Nebraska who I were talking to right before this said they're supposed to get a public hearing. When is that? They should have had that announced to them by now. Usually in most cases, you get a public hearing with a 30-day notice. Well, April 22nd is around the corner. Where's the 30-day notice? And to my knowledge, it's still the only hearing. That is ridiculous. We need to demand more hearings on this environmental impact statement for all of us. Next, we also need to keep demanding that we get a cleaner energy portfolio. Already ridiculously true, our Public Utility Commission in Texas is rolling back a commitment from 2005 to more renewable wind and solar energy. And they are trying to actually roll back a law they passed in 2005 for more megawatts of power. And last, we need states to protect our landowners. Agriculture is not second to oil and gas. I come from a farm, and you know what? You can't eat oil. You can't drink oil. And frankly, all the people here today, whether you live in a city or on a farm, we as citizens deserve a clear and transparent process with a level playing field and a sense of fairness that protects us, our neighbors, and our communities. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for having me.